The day my parents found out how much I earn was the same day I realized I never truly mattered to them. Only my paycheck did. Stick with me as I walk you through what happened. And if this story hits you in any way, don't forget to show some love by subscribing, liking, and sharing it with the people who matter to you. My name is Avery Mallon. I'm 26, a software analyst, and for most of my life, I believed that if I worked hard enough, my parents would finally see me, really see me. Not as the kid who cooked her own meals at 10 years old. Not as the teenager who worked part-time jobs to keep the lights on. But as their daughter, someone they could be proud of. Growing up, Corinne and Dalton Mallon never held real jobs. They always had excuses ready. My mom said her back hurt too much to work, except she danced at every barbecue without a problem. My dad claimed every boss he'd ever had disrespected him. Somehow, the world was always wrong, and they were always victims. Meanwhile, I became the one who cleaned, cooked, studied, and kept the house steady. I didn't get to be a kid. I grew up fast because I had no choice. When I finally got my first big paycheck from my new job, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Maybe things could get better. Maybe we could become a real family. Maybe they would congratulate me, hug me, tell me they knew I could make it. But that wasn't what happened. One evening, my parents showed up at my apartment without calling. I smiled anyway, trying to convince myself this was going to be good. Corinne walked around like she owned the place, checking my countertops, peeking into my fridge. Dalton sat on the couch, tapping his foot like he was waiting for a meeting to start. Then Corinne said, "So, we heard you're making good money now." I froze. They hadn't even said hello. Before I could respond, Dalton leaned forward and said, "It's time you start helping us out. Family owes family, Avery. You wouldn't have gotten where you are without us." I felt something inside me crack, like a quiet snap I couldn't ignore. They didn't ask how I was doing. They didn't ask if I was happy. They didn't congratulate me. They didn't care about my struggles, my effort, or how hard I had worked to get here. They only cared about what my bank account could do for them. Corinne crossed her arms. "We need you to cover the mortgage and the utilities. And maybe give us some extra each month. You're making plenty." Plenty. As if it had fallen from the sky. As if I hadn't fought for every inch of it. In that moment, something became painfully clear. I had never been their daughter. I had always been their lifeline, their safety net, their backup plan. And now that I finally had something good, they wanted to take it. That night was the beginning of everything. The moment betrayal took its first breath. I grew up in Ruston, Missouri, in a house that looked normal from the outside, but felt heavy the moment you stepped through the door. I was too young to understand it then, but everything in that home ran on one kind of currency: guilt. My parents spent it like it was endless, and I was the only one they expected to pay. My mom, Corinne, had this way of turning every situation into a test of my loyalty. If I asked why we couldn't afford groceries, she'd sigh dramatically and say, "If you loved us, you'd help us more, Avery." I was 8 the first time she said that. 8 years old, and already made to feel responsible for 2 grown adults. I used to stand there, clutching the edge of the kitchen counter, wondering what kind of daughter I was if love meant fixing everything. Then there was my dad, Dalton. He always claimed he didn't work because no boss respects a man like me. He'd sit on the porch, arms crossed, talking about how the world was out to crush him. I refused to bow to anyone, he'd say. But the truth was simpler. He just didn't want to work. Not when he had a child who could grow up and carry the load for him. Most kids were learning to tie their shoes at 7. I was learning how to stretch $20 for a week's worth of meals. I figured out how to walk to school alone, pack my own lunches, and finish homework in a house filled with arguments about bills that never got paid. No one taught me how to be independent. I just had to be. By the time I reached middle school, I had already taken on roles no child should ever have to touch. I was the one reminding them about due dates, calling the utility company, and finding coupons so we could scrape by. When our power got shut off one winter, Dalton blamed me for not paying attention, even though I was 12. I didn't cry. I just covered myself in the thickest blanket I had and tried to make it through the night. Looking back, it's clear I raised myself more than they ever raised me. I learned to keep my head down and keep moving, even when the weight felt impossible. I learned that in our house, love wasn't gentle or warm. It was a tool they used to pressure me into stepping up, again and again, no matter the cost. So when my parents demanded money from me years later, claiming I owed them something, the pain wasn't new, it was old. It came from every moment they used guilt to shape me into the adult they needed. not the child I was supposed to be. Their demands hit so deeply because they weren't sudden. They were the continuation of a lifelong pattern. A pattern I had spent years trying to escape. Avery didn't even realize she had slipped her most recent pay stub into her purse that morning. She was in a rush, running late for work, and shoved it inside without thinking. That evening, when she stopped by her parents' house for dinner, she had no idea that a simple piece of paper would set off something she could never take back. Dinner started like it always did. Corinne talking about how tired she was from doing everything, even though Avery knew her mother barely left the couch most days. Dalton complained about the neighbors, the government, and how life used to be simpler. Avery sat quietly, trying to keep the atmosphere steady. She knew how quickly things could turn. When she excused herself to use the restroom, her purse sat on the chair beside her. She didn't hear the quiet shuffle of her parents moving around. She didn't see the way her mother's eyes darted toward the bag. She didn't know her father nudged Corinne with that approving look he used whenever they were about to cross a line together. By the time Avery returned to the table, the air felt different, tense, charged. Her purse was zipped slightly differently, but she didn't connect the dots until Corinne placed the pay stub on the table like a weapon. "So," Corinne said, tapping the paper with a stiff finger, "this is what you've been hiding from us." Avery's heart kicked hard against her ribs. "Why were you going through my purse?" Dalton leaned back, arms crossed. "Don't change the subject. You make this much, and you let us struggle? After all we've done for you." Avery blinked, stunned. "All you've done for me? What exactly?" Corinne slammed her hand against the table, making the plates rattle. "Don't you dare disrespect us. You owe us back pay for being born." Avery stared at her, unable to process the words. "Back pay for being born." Dalton pulled the paper closer. "We've decided it's fair you give us $3,000 a month. You can afford it. And it's time you start paying us what we deserve." Avery felt the room tilt. $3,000? That's insane. I have my own bills, my own life. You owe us," Corinne shouted, her face twisting with anger. "We raised you. We sacrificed for you." Avery felt something break inside her. "You didn't raise me. I raised myself." The room fell silent for a moment, just a moment, before Corinne's fury exploded. She slammed the table again, harder this time, the sound echoing through the small dining room. "You ungrateful child. You think you're better than us now." Avery stood up slowly. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the realization settling deep into her bones. This wasn't love. It wasn't family. It was entitlement wrapped in manipulation. Walking out that door that night felt heavier than anything before. The betrayal wasn't new, but this time it felt final. Avery thought the worst was behind her after the dinner disaster, but she underestimated just how far her parents were willing to go. A week later, while she was finishing a project at her desk, she heard raised voices near the reception area. At first she ignored it. Offices were loud sometimes. But then she heard her name. "Avery Mallon. We know you're in here." Her stomach dropped. She stood up slowly, hoping she was wrong, but the moment she stepped into the hallway, she saw them. Corinne and Dalton, standing in the middle of the lobby like they owned the place, drawing the eyes of every coworker nearby. Corinne pointed at her the moment she appeared. There she is, the daughter who can't even help her own parents. Avery felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you doing here?" Dalton waved a folder in the air. "We need you to come sign some papers. We brought the forms to add us to your bank account. It's time you stop being stubborn." A few coworkers paused what they were doing, pretending not to stare while very clearly staring. Avery wished she could disappear. "You can't just come to my job," she whispered, mortified. "You need to leave." Corinne scoffed loudly. "Not until you do what you owe us. We're done waiting." Before Avery could respond, her manager, Iliard Kessler, approached. He wasn't a tall man, but he had a calm presence that filled the space with authority. He smiled politely. "Hello, I'm Iliard. And you must be Avery's family?" Dalton grinned, thinking he found an ally. "Yes, and we need a moment with her." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Iliard said, still polite but firm. "You cannot disrupt our workplace like this. I'll have to ask you to leave immediately." Corinne's expression twisted. "Are you defending her? She's abandoning her parents." Iliard didn't flinch. "Sir, ma'am, this is a professional environment. You're welcome to contact Avery outside of work, but you cannot be here right now." Dalton puffed up. "We have rights." Iliard nodded. "And we have security. That shut them up." He gestured toward the door, guiding them out with calm firmness. Avery stood frozen, cheeks burning, watching her coworkers whisper behind their hands. Once her parents were gone, Iliard pulled Avery aside into his office. He sat gently on the edge of his desk. Avery, I'm not going to pretend I know everything happening, but this isn't normal. You need boundaries. Strong ones. Avery swallowed hard. I know. I just didn't expect them to come here. He nodded. Please take care of yourself. And if they come back again, let me know immediately. When Avery left the office, her phone buzzed nonstop. 5 voicemails. 10 messages. All from her parents. You're heartless. You're turning strangers against your own family. We will tell everyone what kind of daughter you are. Avery stood there in the hallway, listening to the venom pour through the speaker. And for the first time, she didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just felt tired. Tired enough to start planning her way out. Permanently. Avery was finally settling into a quiet morning at work when the message came through. HR needs to see you immediately. No details. No explanation. Just a summons that made her chest tighten. She sat frozen for a moment, her fingers hovering above her keyboard, the room suddenly feeling too bright, too loud. When she walked into the HR office, her hands were already trembling. The director, Ms. Nolan, gave her a look that wasn't angry, but serious enough to make Avery's heartbeat spike. Avery, she said gently, we received some concerning calls this morning. Avery swallowed. Calls? Ms. Nolan nodded and folded her hands. 2 individuals identifying themselves as your parents contacted us. They claimed you've been committing tax fraud and reporting false income. They insisted we investigate immediately. The world seemed to tilt. What? Avery whispered. That's not true. That's not even possible. They were very persistent, Ms. Nolan continued. They called multiple times. They said they were trying to protect the company from losing money on a criminal. Avery felt her throat tightening. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Her parents, her own parents, trying to get her fired? She had known things were bad, but this was another level. She forced herself to speak. I swear I didn't do anything wrong. They're lying. They're trying to. Her voice cracked before she could finish. Ms. Nolan softened. Avery, we're not accusing you of anything. We're just trying to understand the situation. She pushed a box of tissues toward her. Can you tell me what's going on at home? Avery wiped her face with shaking hands. She didn't want to spill every painful detail, but she explained enough. The guilt, the demands, the harassment, the confrontation at her workplace. She told them her parents were angry she wouldn't give them money. She told them she had tried to set boundaries, and they refused to accept them. By the time she finished, Ms. Nolan's gentle expression had hardened, not at Avery, but at the situation. Avery, thank you for telling me. I'm so sorry you're going through this. She paused before continuing. We're putting a blocking order on their numbers. They won't be able to contact the company again. If they try using other numbers or show up here, security will remove them immediately. Avery's breath shook as she exhaled. A strange mixture of relief and heartbreak washed over her. HR wasn't punishing her. They were protecting her. But the fact that she even needed protection, from her own parents, cut deeper than anything before. Ms. Nolan walked her to the door. And Avery, please understand this clearly. What they did wasn't concern or confusion. It was harmful. Malicious. Malicious. The word echoed in Avery's mind all the way back to her desk. She sat down slowly, staring at her screen without seeing it. Up until now, she kept trying to believe her parents were just misguided, overwhelmed, maybe even desperate. But no, they were willing to destroy her life to control her. And for the first time, Avery accepted the truth. She wasn't dealing with struggling parents. She was dealing with people who wanted to break her. Avery unlocked her apartment door that evening expecting the usual quiet. Maybe she'd heat up leftovers, take a shower, and try to forget the nightmare her parents had created at work. But the moment she stepped inside, she froze. The air felt wrong. Too still. Too disturbed. Her eyes traveled slowly across the living room, and her stomach dropped. Her desk drawers were open. Papers were scattered. Filing folders lay on the floor like someone had thrown them in frustration. Her personal documents, tax forms, bank letters, employment contracts, were spread out in messy piles. But nothing else was touched. Her laptop sat exactly where she left it. Her TV was still mounted. Her jewelry box was closed. This wasn't a robbery. Whoever came wasn't looking for valuables. They were looking for information. Avery's breath shook as she stepped forward, her hands trembling while she picked up one of the scattered envelopes. Every instinct inside her screamed the same terrifying thought. They were here. She immediately called her landlord, who rushed over and pulled up the security footage from the cameras installed near the building entrances. Avery stood behind him, arms wrapped around herself, wishing she didn't already know what she was about to see. The footage played, and her heart cracked open. There they were, her mother and father, standing outside her door like they belonged there. Dalton pulled out a small metal key, an old spare Avery had forgotten even existed. She faintly remembered giving it to them years ago, back when she still believed they cared about her safety. She never imagined they'd secretly make a copy. They tried the lock. Successfully. Corinne pushed the door open, glancing around before stepping inside. Dalton followed, closing the door behind them. Avery covered her mouth. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. The pain was too sharp. It felt like it had bypassed emotion entirely and gone straight to numbness. Her landlord looked at her with wide eyes. Avery, I'm so sorry. This is a violation. She nodded but could barely hear him. Her mind was spinning. They came into my home. They went through my life like it belonged to them. She called the police. When the officers arrived, they walked through the apartment, took notes, and watched the footage. But their faces told her what their words confirmed. Since nothing was stolen, and they technically had a key, it's tricky. We don't have enough clear evidence of criminal intent. Avery stared at them. So they can just do this? Break in? Go through my personal documents? And nothing happens. The officer shifted uncomfortably. We understand how upsetting this is. But legally, our hands are tied unless they try again, or we have stronger proof. When they left, Avery sat on the edge of her bed, the silence in the apartment crushing her. Everything she had worked for, her privacy, her peace, her independence, felt like it was crumbling. Her parents didn't just want money. They wanted control. Total control. In that moment, the fear inside her hardened into something sharper. If she didn't fight back now, they wouldn't stop until she had nothing left. Not her job, not her home, not her future. They would destroy everything she built. And she refused to let them. Avery didn't sleep the night after the break-in. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. Her parents in the hallway, her documents scattered across the floor, the police shrugging because nothing was stolen. By sunrise, something inside her had shifted. Fear no longer controlled her. Determination did. The next morning, she made a call she never imagined she would. She contacted a lawyer. Marla Kavanaugh's office sat in a quiet brick building downtown. When Avery walked in, she felt small, nervous, like she was betraying some unspoken rule of family loyalty. But the moment Marla looked up from her desk, steady eyes, calm expression, Avery knew she was in the right place. Tell me everything, Marla said gently. And Avery did. She told her about the demands for money, the scene at her workplace, the HR meeting, the endless voicemails. She described the break-in and the footage showing her parents slipping into her apartment with an old key. She even showed Marla texts from childhood. Messages she had saved without knowing why, messages filled with guilt, accusations, and manipulation. Marla listened without interrupting, taking careful notes. When Avery finally finished, she sat back in her chair. Avery, she said, this is not normal parental behavior. This is harassment. And it's escalating. Avery swallowed hard. I didn't want to believe that. I know, Marla replied. But denial doesn't protect you. Action will. Together, they began gathering every piece of evidence Avery had. The voicemails full of insults and threats. The HR report documenting the false tax fraud accusation. Screenshots of missed calls at all hours. Photos of her apartment after the break-in. The security footage showing her parents using the key. Every item added weight to the truth Avery had been avoiding for years. This is more than a boundary issue, Marla explained. Your safety, your job, and your future are at risk. We're going to protect them. Marla guided her step by step. First, they filed for a restraining order to prevent Corinne and Dalton from coming near Avery's home or workplace. Then, a trespassing complaint for entering her apartment without permission. After that, Marla began drafting a cease and desist letter addressing the harassment directed at Avery's employer. By the time they were done, Avery felt two powerful emotions collide inside her. Guilt, because these were her parents, the people she spent her whole life trying to please. And liberation, because for the first time, she was choosing herself. When Marla handed her the initial paperwork to sign, Avery's hands hesitated for only a second. She thought about her childhood, all the pressure, all the manipulation disguised as love. She thought about how they tried to destroy her job, her peace, her stability. Then she signed her name. The pen left a dark, clean line across the page, a boundary her parents could no longer cross. As she left the lawyer's office, Avery didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel cruel. She felt something deeper, heavier, and necessary. Revenge wasn't about hurting them. It was about finally protecting herself. The morning of the courthouse hearing felt unreal to Avery. She sat on a bench outside the courtroom, hands clasped tightly, listening to the hum of footsteps and distant conversations. Her heart pounded, but her resolve stayed firm. She had to do this. She had to protect herself. When the courtroom doors opened, Avery stepped inside and immediately spotted her parents. Corinne wore a dramatic shawl like she was attending a funeral, her eyes already watery. Dalton sat beside her stiffly, glaring at anyone who glanced their way. The moment they saw Avery, Corinne let out a loud sniff, loud enough for everyone to hear. "There she is," Corinne whispered to the woman next to her, loud enough to carry. "My daughter abandoning her own flesh and blood." Avery closed her eyes briefly. She expected anger from them. She didn't expect a performance. When the judge entered, Corinne straightened up, adopting a broken expression. Dalton leaned forward, shaking his head as if he were a wounded parent fighting to understand why their child had turned cruel. The judge reviewed the documents quietly, then looked up. "Ms. Mallon, you may speak." Avery stood, legs steady despite the storm inside her. "Your Honor, my parents have crossed boundaries for years. Recently they tried to force their way into my finances, showed up at my workplace unannounced, and even entered my apartment without permission. They've made false claims about me to my employer and continue to harass me. I'm asking for protection, not out of spite, but out of necessity." Corinne gasped dramatically, clutching her chest. "How could you say such things about us? We're your parents. We only wanted to guide you." Dalton chimed in, voice shaking with false emotion. "She's lying, Your Honor. She's been brainwashed by strangers. We are the victims here." Avery didn't look at them. She kept her focus on the judge. The judge flipped to the page containing the security footage stills. "I see documentation of an attempted entry into Ms. Mallon's residence using an old key." Then she read the HR report. Then the typed-out voicemails. Her expression hardened. "Corinne and Dalton Mallon," the judge said firmly, "your behavior is concerning and unacceptable." Corinne immediately burst into tears. "We just needed her help. She owes us for raising her." Avery's jaw tightened. The judge continued, undeterred. "I am issuing a temporary restraining order effective immediately. A full hearing will be scheduled to determine if a permanent order is warranted." Corinne wailed. Dalton cursed under his breath. But Avery didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply breathed. When she stepped outside into the sunlight, it felt like fresh air for the first time in months. She didn't expect her parents to follow her, but they did. Dalton's footsteps were sharp against the concrete. He leaned in close, his voice low and venomous. "You were supposed to save us." Avery met his eyes, steady, unbroken. "I was never yours to use." And with that, she walked away, leaving their collapse behind her. In the days after the temporary restraining order, Avery expected things to quiet down. Instead, the fallout hit like a wave she never saw coming. Word traveled fast in Ruston, faster than truth ever could, and it didn't take long for her parents to twist the story into something dramatic and self-serving. Corinne became the loudest voice in town, telling anyone who would listen that Avery had abandoned her poor, aging parents and thrown them out like trash. She added flair to every retelling, saying Avery was selfish, ungrateful, poisoned by money. She even claimed Avery had invented the break-in to ruin them. But Ruston was small, and people had long memories. The ones who knew Corinne and Dalton, really knew them, didn't need explanations. They remembered the unpaid favors, the sudden disappearances when bills were due, the dramatic excuses that changed every week. They remembered Corinne's gossip and Dalton's temper. Most people just nodded politely when she ranted, then rolled their eyes the moment she walked away. Meanwhile, Avery tried to keep her life steady, though the emotional weight still followed her like a shadow. She found unexpected support where she least anticipated it. Iliard from work checked in every few days, making sure she felt safe, reminding her she had a team behind her. He reassured her she hadn't done anything wrong, that her career wasn't at risk, and that the company stood with her. Her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who usually kept to herself, left a small note on Avery's door one evening. "You don't owe anyone your peace. Proud of you for protecting it." Avery held the note for a long time, surprised by how much comfort a few simple words could offer. And of course Marla, her lawyer, stayed steady through it all, updating her on the progress of the case, preparing for the next hearing, reminding her of every right she had. Whenever Avery's voice wavered or doubt crept in, Marla pulled her back to solid ground. But despite all the support, guilt lingered. It lived quietly in the corners of Avery's mind. She questioned herself in the silence of her apartment, wondering whether she had gone too far, wondering if a better daughter would have found another way. It was the old conditioning, resurfacing again and again, telling her she owed them something. But every time those thoughts rose, reality pushed back. While Avery worked hard and rebuilt her life piece by piece, her parents spiraled. Without her financial help, their world began to collapse. Bills piled up. Their carefully crafted lies fell apart. People stopped offering help because they'd seen the same pattern for years. Corinne complained louder. Dalton grew angrier. They had built their lives on the expectation that Avery would save them forever. Now that she had stepped back, their entire structure crumbled. And Avery, though she sometimes ached with guilt, did not bend. She reminded herself that protecting herself wasn't betrayal. It was survival. For the first time, the weight of their chaos wasn't on her shoulders. And she wasn't going to let it return. The final court hearing arrived on a gray morning that seemed to absorb every ounce of worry Avery had left. She sat in the courtroom, hands clasped in her lap, waiting for the judge to speak. Corinne and Dalton sat across the room, whispering to each other, shooting glances filled with wounded pride and quiet rage. But Avery didn't flinch. She had spent too long being afraid. Today, she was simply done. When the judge finally read the decision, her voice was clear and unwavering. "The restraining order is hereby made permanent." Avery didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply breathed, a deep, steady breath that felt like it reached the parts of her she had kept locked tight for years. Her parents reacted exactly as expected. Corinne gasped loudly, clutching her chest like a stage actress. Dalton muttered under his breath, shaking his head, staring at Avery as though she had personally ruined his entire life. But their reactions no longer touched her. The wall between them was finally legal, solid, and impenetrable. After the hearing, Avery walked outside and felt the cold air brush against her face. It felt like a beginning, not an escape, not a victory lap, but a true beginning. She knew what she had to do next. Within 2 weeks, she packed her apartment into boxes, ended her lease, and bought a one-way ticket to Burlington, Vermont. A place her parents had never visited, a place with no memories tied to them, a place where she could start as simply Avery. Not the family savior, not the emotional punching bag, not the daughter carrying everyone's burdens. She didn't leave a forwarding address. She didn't tell her parents she was moving. She didn't send one last message explaining her reasons. She owed them nothing. On her last night before leaving, she sat at her small kitchen table and wrote a letter she knew she would never send. In it, she let herself say the things she had carried silently for years. The grief of losing the family she wished she had, the sorrow of realizing love had been one-sided, the pain of finally walking away. But she also wrote about strength, about choosing peace over chaos, about finally understanding that protecting herself was not cruelty, it was survival. When she finished, she folded the letter and tucked it into the back of a drawer. It wasn't for them. It was for her. The day she arrived in Burlington, she unlocked the door to her new apartment, a small, sunlit space with bare walls and quiet floors. No echoes of shouting, no heavy footsteps, no tension hiding in corners. She set her keys on the counter and stood in the middle of the empty room, letting the silence wrap around her. It wasn't lonely. It wasn't sad. It felt clean. New. Hers. For the first time in her life, Avery felt the weight lift completely. Not because someone saved her, but because she finally saved herself. A life that was finally her own had just begun. What about you? Do you believe Avery made the right choice by cutting ties for her own peace, or should she have given her parents one more chance? I'm curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this resonate with you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one.